Welcome back to the Deep Dive Canada. So for this deep dive, we've got something customized just for you, and it's a really staggering national paradox.
A paradox is definitely the right word for it.
It really is. I mean, how can a country that produces so much oil, well, how can it seem like we just can't build the facilities we need to refine it? It's a tension that, it really defines a critical part of our whole national economy.
And we're diving straight into a source called Excerpts from the Conundrum of Canadian Oil Refineries. Our mission here is basically to take this source material, which is very focused, and just unpack the mystery it's presenting.
Right.
Because it asks this deceptively simple question that, when you look closer, it reveals some really deep industrial cracks, systemic bottlenecks.
Exactly. Because the core claim we're investigating here, I mean, it's the title of our deep dive. It's this: why Canada can't build its own refineries. You immediately feel the tension there, right? We are, one of the largest oil and gas producers globally.
Top tier.
And yet the source claims there's this inherent inability to develop our own domestic infrastructure, to add value to our own stuff.
It sounds absurd when you put it like that.
It does sound contradictory, maybe even absurd. Okay, let's unpack this.
So I think the first step in really understanding this industrial puzzle is to look at the language.
The language the source itself is using.
Exactly. Because the author signals the severity right away. They didn't call this the challenge or the issue, but a conundrum. And that choice of language, it suggests the problem isn't linear. It's, it involves factors that are pulling in completely opposite direction.
Creating a stalemate.
An institutional and economic stalemate, yeah.
And that's a really crucial distinction. I mean, a challenge is something you throw resources at it and you overcome it.
Sure, it's a hurdle.
Right. But a conundrum, that implies a complexity that goes so far beyond simple economics. If the market math was easy, if it all just worked out, these refineries would already be here. They'd be built. So the fact that the source itself calls it a conundrum tells us we're dealing with forces that are, I guess, mutually exclusive or contradictory.
Yeah, creating this sort of perpetual friction.
Exactly.
And that leads right into the core idea that you, the listener, really need to internalize. The constraint is defined as an inability to build.
Not just like a preference for exports or something.
No, not just market reluctance. In the context of a highly capitalized, resource-rich economy like Canada's, an inability implies something else. It implies these powerful systemic blocks that stop major industrial projects before they even get off the ground.
I think for anyone listening to this, that word inability is really the key insight from the source material.
It is.
It's the difference between saying, oh, it's currently too expensive, and saying, we are structurally blocked from even trying.
That's a huge difference.
Right. The second one implies a problem that you can't just fix by raising more capital. Something else is fundamentally broken.
And what's fascinating here is that to understand this inability, we have to look at the sheer scale of the capital that's required.
Okay.
Building a major refinery isn't a short-term thing. We are talking multi-billion-dollar commitments.
Billions with a B.
Oh, yeah, often $10 billion or more. The construction timeline alone can span half a decade, and then...
And then it has to run for how long?
It has an operational life of 40 to 50 years. So this kind of investment, it demands absolute, ironclad regulatory and political certainty.
So if the source is defining this whole situation as an inability, it implies that the environment you need for those long-term, massive capital projects,
yeah,
it just doesn't exist in Canada right now.
That seems to be the implication.
It's a risk profile that would scare away even the biggest players because the timeline, the horizon, is just too unstable.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source seems to imply that the inability is often tied to what we call timeline risk.
Timeline risk.
And the capital risk that results from that. The excerpts hint that, regulatory pathways, permitting processes, they are so protracted.
So dragged out.
Dragged out and subject to so many points of appeal and political shifts that an investor just can't confidently guarantee the project will even be completed.
Let alone operate predictably for the next 4 decades.
Let alone that.
Yeah.
So that uncertainty, that's the trauma blockage, not a lack of raw oil.
But hold on, if the source is really focusing on regulatory and political uncertainty, isn't the government itself, through its policy or delays, isn't it the chief force behind this inability?
That's a good pushback.
I'm just questioning if this is purely a neutral structural thing. Does the source material put the pressure squarely on, say, bureaucratic friction? Or is it broader?
This raises an important question because the source definitely points toward administrative and legal complexity as a decisive factor. It suggests that environmental reviews, permitting processes, they act as these hard blocks. For example, the source might cite a case where a project faces, say, 15 years of regulatory review.
15 years.
And during that time, courts or new laws can overturn decisions at literally any stage.
So nothing is ever final.
That massive, unpredictable timeline, it effectively becomes an economic impossibility for anyone looking to invest.
That's a key distinction for you, the listener, to grasp. It's making yes functionally impossible because of all this procedural quicksand.
Well put.
So the issue isn't a lack of engineering skill or oil supply or money.
Yeah.
It's a lack of a stable, long-term legal and permitting framework that can handle these massive investments without being disrupted. We're basically exporting our raw product because we've institutionalized the risk for processing it here at home.
And that feeds directly back into the conundrum.
Two opposing forces.
Right. If the government, say, is aiming for environmental protection, which is a political goal, and that makes permitting unpredictable. But at the same time, it wants strong economic performance from its natural resources, an economic goal. Well, those two aims can become mutually exclusive on the scale we're talking about for a refinery.
Hence, the stalemate. The conundrum.
Exactly.
So we've identified the bottleneck, this lack of domestic refining capacity. And we've looked at the mechanism behind the inability, which seems to be the instability of the investment environment.
Right.
So now let's talk about why this is also relevant to you, our listener. Why does this specific question, the focus of the source, why does it dictate our national economic strategy?
Precisely. The core relevance for you is really understanding the economic impact of this gap in the value chain. If we are structurally unable to refine, we're voluntarily limiting our ability to capture all the economic activity and value-added profit that happens after extraction.
So we ship out raw crude instead of the valuable stuff.
Instead of the final products like gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel.
The source material is essentially diagnosing a hole in Canada's economic bucket. It forces us to be price takers, not value creators, in our own key sector.
That's a good way to frame it.
And the ability to refine domestically isn't just about jobs or exports, is it? It's about strategic security resilience.
It absolutely is. I mean, if we rely entirely on foreign refineries, we make ourselves vulnerable to global market volatility, to geopolitical shocks for essential fuels.
Even though we are literally sitting on the raw material itself.
Right. The source material forces us to confront this lack of strategic control. The question, why can't Canada build its own refineries, is, at its heart, a question about our national economic sovereignty.
Sovereignty over our own resource chain. So if we base our conclusions purely on the framework the source material gives us, the main takeaway isn't really an answer to the why, but more a profound identification of the problem's nature and its scope.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the key takeaway from this source material is the naming of the problem.
The identification.
The identification of a major industrial and economic bottleneck, defined explicitly as a conundrum and an inability. The source's main function seems to be drawing immediate, stark attention to the systemic regulatory and timeline risks that make this kind of value-added domestic processing functionally impossible for huge capital projects.
It's the foundational diagnosis. It shows the roadblocks are administrative and political, not geological or engineering based.
That's the core of it.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If solving this conundrum requires a complete legislative and regulatory overhaul, to reduce that timeline risk and bring back some investment predictability, what steps, and I don't mean just ideas, but concrete time-bound steps, what would need to be announced and implemented just to shift this issue from a complex, seemingly unsolvable conundrum into, say, a defined, manageable challenge with a predictable list of hurdles?
A fascinating test of national ambition and regulatory agility.
It really is. It's the shift from just identifying the walls to maybe finding the blueprints for a door.
Thank you so much for sharing your sources and joining us on this deep dive into the constraints defining Canadian refining capacity. We thrive on tackling these kinds of complex, tailored topics.
And if you enjoyed this analysis and want more customized knowledge briefings like this one delivered straight to you, make sure to subscribe to the Deep Dive Canada channel to keep learning with us.